At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Dès ma première rencontre avec M. Nehru, Delhi et à Chandigarh,
how from being a totally dusty plain, Chandigarh is now covered with greenery.
City must grow. It must be given a direction.
Hello and welcome to the story of Chandigarh, a podcast about how the modernist city of Chandigarh came into being and what its future might look like. This is Ishan Shafla, and with me is Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash. In today's episode, we explore the Secretariat building. We discuss Corbusier's transformation of the building, its Excel spreadsheet architecture, its oceanliner-like quality, and its potential for infinite expansion. We also highlight the uniqueness of its ramps and roof garden. Let's continue where we left off last episode. We finished talking about the High Court, and would the Secretariat follow if we continue in the order of construction? Is that right?
I think that's right. The Secretariat was the next building to be made, although the Assembly was also designed. But I think the Secretariat was the next building because it had to house the ministers and the bureaucracy. I think they were operating out of some school in Sector 10, I think.
So when the High Court is under construction, the design and the orientation of the Secretariat and the Assembly is already in place, or he's still fine-tuning them?
He's fine-tuning them. So originally, I think you might know this, but the Secretariat was a vertical building, a tall skyscraper type of building.
And it was oriented the other way, perpendicular to how it is right now. Right?
That's right. It was oriented facing the city with its, in a sense, back to the mountains.
Right.
It was supposed to be kind of a visual terminus to Janmarg, that you would be driving up Janmarg and you would see the height of the Secretariat visible at its terminus with the mountains in the background. That was the conception of it. And in the Corbusier vocabulary, if you look at his designs before Chandigarh, office buildings where, the captains of industry and captains of government, the leaders of society, because he was a, big believer in leaders, significant leaders, overmen. Nietzschean overman kind of concept. Their buildings were always vertical. Office buildings were always vertical. And with the prime example, the only example of that kind of a building that was built, is the United Nations, is an example of the vertical skyscraper of Corbusier design. And then, of course, the ministry building in Sao Paulo by Oscar Niemeyer, I think is also an example of a vertical skyscraper. But those were, what I'm saying is, those were meant to be office buildings, and the horizontal buildings of the kind that Secretariat eventually took the form were always housing. So the Unité de Habitation, shared living systems, which is Unité de Habitation, the meaning of Unité de Habitation is shared living systems. He never called them apartments or condominiums or anything. Those were all shared living systems. So office buildings, vertical, housing, horizontal, which also has a gendered reading to it. So, because houses is the domestic realm, it's more the realm led by the woman, so to speak, or the zone of the family. The zone of the family is horizontal with an extremely long roof at the top for children to play. So if you go to the unités in that have been built, like in Marseille and other places in Europe, the roof is the place, big long roof is a place for the children to play. Whereas in the Secretariats, the roof is less because it's a vertical building, right? Surface area of the roof is less, so it's not supposed to be a play area.
I thought it'd be horizontal because you're horizontal, in bed, and vertical for office because you're, upright.
Oh, yes,
working.
That's a good reading too. Yeah. So there's a domesticity to the horizontal. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're horizontal in bed. In that sense, it's a sleeping space and, of course, therefore also a sexual space.
So why do you think he made the switch from vertical to horizontal?
See, originally, the capital complex was supposed to be very visible to and connected to the city. But at some point, he decided that, okay, the city is being designed by Genre and all these other people, and I don't really want to have anything much to do with it. So he screened off the capital complex by making artificial hills and made the capital complex into kind of like his own enclosed playground with artificial hills towards the south, the natural hills towards the north, the Shivalik hills with the agricultural fields and the villages included in there. Then on one side was the lake. So that was not accessible, so that there would be a framed view of the capital from there. And on the other side, to block off the capital complex, which is from the west side, he then took the Secretariat and made it horizontal, like a wall. See, now the Secretariat makes a wall from the Chandigarh club side, blocking off the rest of the capital complex from view.
Right. So gives some interiority to the plaza.
So he made it from vertical, it went horizontal so that it could function as that wall. And in doing that, it also became a building that was, horizontal. It laid down and became subservient to the assembly building and at that time the governor's palace, because the main building was going to become the governor's palace. One man, like instead of the whole executive branch, he made the governor's palace the focus of the capital complex as the one man. Kind of.
So it was all kind of staging the governor's palace as the center of the capital.
That's right. That's right. So that's how the Secretariat went down. Later on, of course, the governor's palace was rejected by Nehru. So then he made the assembly the center of the capital complex. But we can come to that later on when we talk about the assembly. But that's how basically, by the turning away the capital complex from the city and by moving the focus of everything to the governor's palace, the Secretariat became horizontal.
You make an analogy of the writers' building in Calcutta in your new book. Compare it to the Secretariat.
That's right. That's my own analysis, because the Secretariat is efficiency, all about efficiency, right? Bureaucracy, and hopefully the efficiency of the bureaucracy. Like, so it's a doubly loaded corridor and, office piled one on top of each other. And the idea is that's the cheapest way to make that many buildings, that many offices, and keep them dense and compact so that theoretically, there can be better communication between one side of the bureaucracy and the other. You don't have to travel great distances. So it's intended to be, make the bureaucracy really work efficiently. That is the
like
aspiration. Like a machine, totally like a machine. So it is a good comparison with the writers' building, which is in Calcutta, which was, of course, a building that was made in the late 18th century, like about 1890s.
So the British made it, right?
The British made it. Warren Hastings was sent by the British government as the first Governor General of India. And he was sent to protect the government's interest over the British East India Company. See, the British East India Company, who was, who were basically under Clive, Lord Sir Clive had taken over huge parts of India, by defeating the Siraj-ud-Dawla, and they had taken over UP and Calcutta and all these areas. They were now generating a lot of revenue. The British East India was generating a lot of revenue, but surprise, surprise, they were paying £0 in taxes. They were saying, no, we had no money. So the British government said, where is all the money going that you're making? And so they clearly anticipated corruption, which was true. So they sent Warren Hastings as the Governor General to figure out what's going on. So Warren Hastings said, all right, I am making a new bureaucracy called writers. Writers are basically accountants. It's the same word. Accountants at that time were called writers. And he said, everything that comes into Calcutta or leaves Calcutta has to be approved by one of the writers. You have to present a slip to them, and they have to recognize and record it and check it. So everything that was going through Calcutta. And so he trained a huge amount of accountants, and he put them in one building, which was extremely long and built like an Excel spreadsheet, like one box after the other, doubly loaded corridor. So the idea of rationalizing commerce was an idea of the 18th century, started by the French and the Dutch, and then taken also over by the English, that immediately increased the revenues of the British Empire significantly. They got rid of a lot of corruption. So Warren Hastings became famous for suddenly making profit for the British Empire. Now, later on, he was impeached by the British Parliament, but that's a separate story. So, this kind of rationalization of accounting is basically what led to modernity, modernization, industrialization, this idea that you could, really control things. So there is actually a direct connection historically that goes from 18th century rationalization to modern thinking to the Secretariat. So the Secretariat is an embodiment of ultra-rationalization.
You say that because it's such a pragmatic looking, like modular, repetitive office blocks that is,
Yes.
Utilitarian in a sense.
Yeah. Utilitarianism, rationalization, all these are hallmarks of modernist thinking. Jeremy Bentham, philosophy of utilitarianism is also early 19th century, is like to find beauty and value in utility. The old ideas were things of utility are to be hidden. Only grace and charm is to be presented, right?
Mhm.
But modern architecture says, no, there is grace and charm and utility. So that's why Corbusier, in Towards a New Architecture, or Vers une Architecture, Towards an Architecture, champions the ocean liner, because he says, oh, you take rationalization and utility, and then you make it into a beautiful object. And an example of that is the ocean liner, because the ocean liners had to be rationalized for hydraulics. And he said, well, we can make buildings the same way. So that's how he came to sort of skyscraper and the Unité idea. So the Unité de Habitation is basically an ocean liner made in concrete. So that's how the Secretariat, so it's an office building that has sort of been laid flat, but it was sort of a backdrop, and it's a highly rationalized modernist, classic example of modernist thinking. Now, the other reason, of course, why it was laid flat and given the orientation it was is because this is the direction of the prevailing winds. The winds go northeast to southwest in Chandigarh, right? They all travel along east to west on the Madhya Marg, along all the margs, and not along all the paths, which is why the High Court is also oriented the way it is. So by putting the Secretariat horizontally down in the orientation it does, it allows for natural ventilation through the building.
Across, you mean? Across,
yeah. When it was facing the city and facing at 90 degrees, that would have not allowed for ventilation, natural ventilation.
And was it always, even in its original orientation, was it always kind of dug in or like sunk into the ground like it is currently?
That was done later also. So originally, the original building, like all Corbusier buildings, was intended to be lifted above the ground.
Like the Unité.
Like the Unités, or like Villa Savoye. Any Corbusian classic modernist building, Corbusier's idea was that every building should be on stilts. And the reason why it should be on stilts is so that the ground plane continues uninterrupted. The idea of putting buildings on stilts was they were all to be built, like, so to speak, in the air. They only use air real estate, and the ground remains free, which had two ideas. One is that, he didn't like the traditional street, which cut up the ground and, made it into streets. He said land should be free. Land should just continue. Nature should be unspoiled nature as far as possible. And, the noble savage, natural human beings running around in nature, being acrobats. This was his vision. And so that's why there is also Rajendra Park right next to the Secretariat, was intended to be a place for, for people to be their natural selves. Natural selves, according to him, were always athletic, and which meant they were only men. It weren't really women, but anyway. And that's why Leisure Valley also connects directly to the Capitol complex, because you were supposed to run down the Leisure Valley from the Secretariat all the way down, or at least bike down. Everything was supposed to be physically active. Preferably you run, but if you can't run, you bike, or at least you must walk. So that was the idea of the continuous ground plane, which is why all the green belts in Chandigarh was also supposed to be connected one to the other, because to enable continuous walking or continuous biking. And so the original Secretariat was intended to be lifted for that reason. But once Corbusier sort of laid it flat and made it long and horizontal, he kind of pushed it into the ground, because I don't know why exactly, but mostly I think it has to do with the fact that he had submerged the vehicular traffic, 15, 16 feet below the ground, right? He forced the cars in the Capitol complex to go sub-zero. And so that sort of pushed the Secretariat into the ground, because it's kind of, instead of rising above the ground, it straddled those low places and made a wall. So he disrupted that concept of Pilotis when he made the Secretariat. So the Pilotis as a concept doesn't operate in Chandigarh.
Well,
there are
inside the assembly, maybe.
Well, it's not really. Inside the assembly, the columns are just columns. They are Pilotis only when they lift the building. It's only stilts that are Pilotis. So there are no stilts in Chandigarh, whereas the stilts or Pilotis is like one of the fundamentals of Corbusier design everywhere else, right? Before Chandigarh. But in Chandigarh, there is no stilts.
Why do you think he broke his own rule just for Chandigarh?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. It's basically a really long domino frame, right? With columns and slabs. And then at the two ends, basically he has put brise soleil and aerator windows, intended to protect the glass, if there was glass, wherever there is glass, from the sun. So glass is there, free plan functions, roof garden is there. So the entire Secretariat has a roof garden, and the assembly roof is also supposed to be used. And the strip window is there. All the other principles are there.
The style of the Chandigarh, what would you call it? The railing design, balustrade. There's a block of concrete and there's like a small gap where there's usually a piece of metal to prevent people from falling off.
Right.
That was
right.
And you see it all over Sector 17 as well. So from the get-go, it was like a recurring motif meant to be modular and copied across the city.
Yeah, and I think it was mostly designed to meet the sort of rough craftsmanship with which Chandigarh was made. It's just simple bends to steel. There was bending a lot of steel on site by hand, right? Because you've seen the photographs of the construction sites, and there would be these guys, and they would be on the, bend steel between pieces of iron in wooden blocks. So they knew how to bend steel. So he made the guardrails as simple expressions of that, so that it wouldn't require very high quality construction. I think that's all there is to there.
And there's also in the Secretariat on the facade towards the assembly, there's like a balcony outside the governor's office, isn't there?
Right. So the whole
Type
Secretariat is like a non-stop Excel spreadsheet, right? If you take out all the embellishments, it's like, and particularly if you see the facade from the Chandigarh club site, it's like a huge, big Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So, but on the assembly side, then he sort of, did merge cells, basically. At particular places, he made special cells, like the chief minister's balcony and few other places. He merged a few cells. And then at the top, he made a header block, like in Excel, you connect to make the title. He merged those to make the ramp for the cafeteria at the top. So basically, he just took Excel systems and in the facade played around with them to make something special.
Wow. Did you just come up with the Excel analogy?
The merge cells I just came up with.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Very appropriate with the cells.
Yeah. No, that is what it is. Excel. Modern architecture is Excel spreadsheet architecture because it's about standardization, rationalization, control, as Peter Scriver describes it, which was also a colonial purpose. But then we have the ramps.
Right.
The ramps are, like the one big sensual gesture of the Secretariat. The ramps are curved, they're at a strange angle, and the movement up the ramp is quite a sensual experience, right? I mean, because it's this sort of dark, beautiful space with these sort of square windows with colored glass, right?
Yeah.
So the ramps are the one moment which he gives you joy. The rest of the building is like work.
It's a break in the mundane.
Right. That in between, for a moment, you step outside the spreadsheet and you
literally.
take a literally, you take a little walk in the air and you enjoy some sensuality and then come back to the reality of things.
It's like that, what's it called? The ramp that leads you to the aircraft, the walkway.
Sort of like that. Yes. That's
that
right.
sort of layout.
The jetway, we call it the jetway. Yeah, it has that similar quality. So like a jetway, it's a sort of it's a heterotypic space, the ramp space. Like it's neither here nor there. It doesn't belong to the building. It doesn't belong to the land. It doesn't belong to, it's sort of a no man's land.
You can get lost in there, but it gives you clues to the outside world. There's little windows that are...
Yeah, little bit, little clue, but at an angle. The windows are at an angle to the... So you're not really sure how to view the world. And it's a strange experience because on one side of the ramp, you get this expansive view of the Capitol complex.
Right.
Through the windows. You turn around and suddenly your nose is pressed against the building, right? Because on the one side, the ramp is very close to the building. On the other side, it gives you a big view of the Capitol complex. So it's schizophrenic experience.
Yeah.
As you go up the ramp and you look up the windows, on the one hand, you're right next to this huge building and you might think you're in the middle of Manhattan because you can't see anything else other than like a huge skyscraper, right?
Yeah.
And then you turn around and, oh my God, it's wide open. And you're considering the Himalayas.
Were there always elevators in this building?
Yeah. There were elevators always, yes.
Okay. But he always makes it a point to include ramps whenever he can.
Yes, because he hated stairs. He thought stairs were the banal, the worst thing ever designed. And he said the ramp is the, way you walk and you rise up without exertion. Not exertion, no, just that's a natural way to rise up. And you just walk comfortably, go up. So he loved ramps. And I think, he sort of liked ramps he saw the ramps in the Via Sacra, the sacred way going up to the Acropolis. It's a long ramp which slowly takes you up the Acropolis. And in the Egyptian buildings like the Temple of Hatshepsut, etc., long ramps, right? So the ramp is a luxurious institution. It's inefficient. Stairs are efficient. Elevators are ultra efficient.
Right.
But ramp is luxury. And for him, it was connected to walking. You walk. And when you're walking, you do architectural promenade. You're a flaneur, as Baudelaire would have said. And walking for him did things for you, enabled you to think. The Socratic method, you talk, walk, and think, you do much better because we are, as human beings, deeply evolutionary walking animals. So like Steve Jobs also used to love to walk and talk. So he thought walking was very important, and stairs sort of made the work of going from one place to the other into a deadly chore.
Right.
Elevators took the agency away from you completely, like you became nobody. But ramps enabled you to have a sensual walking experience and think about what you were doing and take a little pause in your efficient work schedule.
Yeah, it really does function like a heterotypic space, like you said, especially because of many factors. But yeah, it's the only splash of color in the Secretariat, it seems.
Yes, that's right.
Was the Secretariat always designed to accommodate more office space than it originally needed?
So I think he was given a certain amount of space needed for the bureaucracy, and I think he exceeded the requirement by a significant degree for the original Punjab government. But of course, once it had to house two governments, Punjab and Haryana, it's already overloaded. But I think implicit always in the Secretariat was the idea that it could be continued.
Right.
Because, its end walls on the north and south sides are just blank walls.
Flat. Yeah.
Flat. So you can just extrude the Secretariat. You can keep extruding it for as long as you want.
Spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's right. The spreadsheet goes on forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can keep expanding the spreadsheet as needed in a sense.
At least horizontally. Yeah.
At least horizontally. Yeah. Maybe not towards the north, but towards
Yeah.
the south, you can just keep expanding into the Leisure Valley and go all the way down to the Leisure Valley to the
Infinitely.
airport infinitely. You can reach, Arabian Sea.
Seems implicit in the design.
Yes. And Corbusier had done this, and I talked about this in my new book. He had done this earlier in his Plan Obus for Algiers,
Right.
which is an infinitely long horizontal building, right? In Algeria, he proposed a building which
That follows the coast, isn't it?
Follows the coast and goes for a very long time. So basically, the road becomes a building.
And in the Museum of Unlimited Growth.
Yes.
The same concept, but spiral.
Which is spiral. A Museum of Infinite Growth. Yeah. It's the spiral which continues. So he's interested in the problem of infinity or perpetual growth.
It's also a very sort of Italian avant-garde idea, isn't it? From the super studio school of thought.
Later on, the super studio, etc., take this idea to the, ultimate conclusion.
Outer space, yeah.
Outer space. So it's very Cartesian in that sense. Corbusier was very fundamentally located within the we can know and map the world Cartesian view of things. You want infinite growth? We can give you infinite growth, no problem. Unlike the High Court. The High Court is a fixed building.
Yeah.
Unchangeable. So that's why when they needed more courts, he had to, do gymnastics and hide them underneath and, put them behind and make them back, go ardent, staggered. So High Court is not designed to grow, but the Secretariat is designed to grow infinitely. What remains also to be talked about the Secretariat is, of course, the roof garden. So at the top, then finally is the roof garden, right? I mean, Corbusier loved roof gardens.
Yeah.
Because he said, first, I'm going to liberate the ground plane. I'm going to not use the ground, which was also a little bit of his critique against private property, because once the ground is not owned by anybody, it can belong to everybody. It's like an idea of the commons. Unlike the colonial view, unlike how Chandigarh was being made, which everything was about plots, right? Owning land. So Corbusier was, you don't own land, you own a house. Now you can buy your house in a unité de habitation. But that's in the air. The land was always free, right? So not only did he make the land free, then he was saying, I'm going to give you new land in the roof so that you can make extra space.
Right. So he made kind of like, it's a magic trick. He made something out of nothing.
Made something out of nothing. That's right. That's right. He said, that's what architecture is. You make something out of nothing. And when the ground plane was open and nature itself, the roof garden was meant to be contained. So he said, you want a garden which is contained? I will give you a garden at the top, right? So that was the roof garden. In the unités, he put the swimming pools and the playgrounds up there for the children. He said, because the critique was, if you have open ground plane, who's going to look after the children? And he said, no, children play upstairs. In the unités, the children play on the roof.
But there's no actual garden up there, is there? There's water tanks and there's a canteen.
No, there are planters. There are
There are
planters in the
planters.
Secretariat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
The idea was that it would be a constructed garden, like it would be an artificial garden. His conception was that lawns are already fake gardens.
That's right.
And, they're not like nature. He wanted the ground
Mm.
plane to be nature, but up there on the roof, you would have gardens. And you can make them into whatever you want to, with flower beds and vegetable patches and, whatever you want it to be. So that's what it's doing. But now it's the Secretariat. There are no children here.
Yeah. So who's
So
it for?
what to do? So he put the canteen up there and said it will
Mhm.
be a lunch place.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he sort of adapted that way, but then he made the guard wall, the wall of the roof garden is very high.
Mm.
So you can't actually see the Capitol complex when you're on the roof garden.
Yeah, except
It
from
goes-
that one spot. Yeah.
Except from that one viewing platform.
Mm. Where
Which
there's
he
a
made-
sniper these days.
There's a sniper these days. But that had the, upward turning parasol roof. It's like, okay, if you want to see the Capitol complex, you have to climb up to this platform and stand up under this special roof
Yeah.
and be aware of the fact that you are seeing the Capitol complex. It's like jharoka, jhanki.
Yeah. It's a framed view. Yeah.
It's framed view and bodily framed. You got to go walk up to it. And then there are cutouts in the parapet, there are holes that you can see the Capitol complex through, but there are
That's right.
not that many. But basically, it's an enclosed space. But the interesting thing about that is, therefore, its only natural view is of the sky.
Which is true
So
for a lot of places in the Capitol complex. I mean, the inside of the assembly chamber, the pit of consideration.
Yes. Yeah. The trench of consideration of the open hand, the inside of the assembly chamber. I think also the roof of the assembly. They all look upwards to the sky. They are sky turned spaces. Like when you're on the roof, he wants your view to be to the sky. He wants you to lie horizontally, and which he thought was also a critical thing because he loved the fact that in India, everybody slept on the roof.
Right.
So like in the original governor's palace, that entire, the chapeau at the top, the upward turned parasol roof at the top, with the stair going up to it, is just meant to be a place for the governor and his family to go up and sleep at night. But it is also a gesture up to the skies. It's hands looking up and looking up to the gods. It's a site of meditation in that sense. So he lifts you up above the ground, brings you to the roof, and now turns your eye to the sky.
Very processional, invoking of the cosmos.
Totally. Cosmos was a big thing for him. So that's why also the symbolism on top of the assembly roof, and you look at the enamel door, etc. The sky was very important for Corbusier, particularly in Chandigarh. Now, there's one other major reference in the roof of the Secretariat. That high parapet wall also is a magnified version of the roof terrace that Corbusier designed for a luxury apartment building on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, like in 1920s, called the Bestigui, I think, the Bestigui apartment. Pesteigui, I think, Bestigui apartment, which was a kind of a roof terrace he designed with a very high wall in which he put fake grass and a fake fireplace and moving trees.
Moving trees?
Yeah.
As in?
Like trees on rollers, like trees in flower pots, which he put on rollers, which could be moved around. So it was a surreal kind of a fun place. It was an apartment he made for a kind of a luxury, like a playboy kind of a character, rich person.
I see.
And this was an apartment, right, and prime residence. So, theoretically, you should be able to see the Arc de Triomphe from this apartment. With Napoleon's cenotaph grave, but he sort of restricted the view. And then he provided a telescope by which you can see the view.
Yeah, I'm just
So
looking
it's
at pictures of it. It's a periscope.
yeah, periscope,
In
like
the
in a submarine.
yeah, yeah.
So it's a very playful, it's a strange, bizarre building.
Mm.
But that situation is also repeated. So getting up on that pedestal from where you can view out where the sniper now sits in the Secretariat is like using a periscope but with your body, literally. It's like a
Right.
periscope moment.
That's very interesting to think that he's thinking of the water on the ocean analogy on multiple levels, even when you get up to the roof. Even in
That's
this,
right.
Paris house, you're on the
That's
top of the
interesting.
house, but you're
Yeah,
still sort of submerged.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that's another interesting thing about the Secretariat. The one final note about the Secretariat is that the way it sits across, the cut, the V-shaped cut, U-shaped cut of the road, because the road is cut into the ground, right?
Mhm.
And then the road leads to the Secretariat. The way the Secretariat sits across that road and the parking lot in front is also like a dam across a valley. So in that sense, it also references dams made across valleys, which was the hydroelectric dams that Nehru was building, in particular Bhakra Rangal Dam, not far away.
Right.
And Corbusier was invited by Nehru to go to the Bhakra Rangal Dam and see if he would suggest some aesthetic improvements and how to sort of make it good looking. He said, basically, this dam is perfect. It's gorgeous. I love it. But you should put my hand on top of it. That's it.
Yeah.
And Nehruji said, okay, see you later. So, but, there's that echo of the dam in the form of the Secretariat.
Yeah.
In terms of how it straddles the
Mm-hmm.
sub-zero road system in the Capitol complex.
But yeah, that analogy makes sense on, on the functional level also, like the dams produce electricity and the Secretariat is kind of like the powerhouse, bureaucratic, headquarters, and it's essential to the functioning of the city.
Something like that, yes. Now, of
Yeah.
course, the Indian bureaucracy is nothing.
Yeah. Needs some lubrication.
Needs some help. So it's an interesting experience. It's kind of a surreal experience. Now things are different, but originally when you had to take permission to go to the roof of the Secretariat, you would go to the lower office and then they would fill out a form and then a guy with a gun would take you up to the top floor. Then some other bureaucrat would record it and he would send it to us, another person for signature. Then they all take and then one copy would be given to you and then you would be brought all the way down and then you could get your guest. And then, the sort of the functioning of the bureaucracy in the environment of the Secretariat was kind of is a sort of a surreal experience. One should do a Jacques Tati kind of film on the Secretariat.
Yeah, I'm sure that process is still in place, and I mean, for some kinds of visitors.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the Secretariat. But in the longer composition, ultimately, the Secretariat is simply backdrop to the assembly. It provides a back screen to the
That's true.
drama of the assembly building. It's like the assembly building is a look at me building and say, I'm pretty. And the Secretariat stands behind and says, yes.
Yes, that's right. That's very funny in a way that the assembly turned out to be that building because in the beginning, even that was leading up to building to the governor's palace. And
that's right. That's right.
I guess he consciously made it so that the governor's palace lack is not felt.
That's right.
Thanks for listening to The Story of Chandigarh. This is your host and producer, Ishan Jafla. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email us at storyofchandigarh@gmail.com. We'll continue our conversation in the next episode. Until then, this is The Story of Chandigarh.